Congratulations on the purchase of your new RIDGID 10-inch compact table saw. I know this will be a great addition to your shop, and you'll get a lot of use out of it. You know, there's more to setting up your table saw than just taking it out of the box and plugging it in. You want to ensure that it was assembled correctly at the factory and that it wasn't damaged during shipping. In this video, I'll walk you through the process of inspecting your new RIDGID R45171 table saw, as well as setting it up correctly, so you're ready to start working safely on your projects. I have more than a dozen videos on the RIDGID compact table saw line in a playlist, including one on alignment, so be sure to check them out. Well, let's get started. As always, make sure you read, understand, and apply all the operational and safety instructions found in your manual. Also, make sure you have a good set of eye protection as well as hearing protection. And of course, make sure you heed all the warning labels that are on your table saw. In this label, they talk about not operating your table saw on the floor. Depending on how you unpack your saw, you may find this packing material kind of wedged in on this one side. Be careful with that because some of your accessories are packed inside of that styrofoam packing material. So you want to make sure you don't drop it as you're pulling the saw out of the box. You also want to turn your saw up on the left-hand side and inspect underneath to make sure you've got any stray packing material loose or any zip ties holding anything in place. I've seen that done with other table saws. I've not seen it done with the RIDGID table saws, but they may change. So just make sure you check under the hood that there's nothing there that might hinder using the saw later on. It's very tempting to want to plug it in, turn it on, and start cutting wood right away. But I want you to hold off because there's several things we need to do before you start cutting any lumber. Also, I want you to notice that all throughout this video, I'm doing this with this table saw unplugged. I never plug it in during this video. So make sure it's unplugged as you're doing this setup process. Your RIDGID table saw comes with a lifetime service agreement. However, you must register your tool within the first 90 days of ownership in order to take advantage of it. All the information you're going to need to register at the website is on this little decal on the right side of your saw. So make sure you get that registered within the first 90 days of purchase. One of the safety features you'll find on your saw is that your power switch requires this little yellow key. You'll find this key in the same plastic bag that your manual comes in. Go ahead and place it onto the power switch before it becomes misplaced. Now let's make sure you have all the parts as well as the tools to set things up. Of course, there you have your manual. And then your rip fence. Your bevel control knob. Wrenches for changing out the blade. Allen wrench and blade guard. And your anti-kickback pause and push stick. And your miter gauge. And these are all the components necessary to set up your stand. I'm going to go into these parts in much greater detail later on in the video. And then some of the hardware necessary to set up the stand. And of course, the tools you're going to be needing to set things up. And another reminder to have some good eye protection as well as hearing protection for when you start using your saw. Now that we've done a parts inventory, let's start putting things together. And the first thing you want to do is install the bevel control knob. And you're going to need a slot point screwdriver and that little bolt right there, the little knob, and then the cover for the knob. And that's going to go in the hole right there on this bevel control. You want to make sure you tighten it down well enough that it still spins, but it doesn't wobble. And this is what it looks like. So it'll spin when you're cranking the bevel control, but you don't want it wobbling very much. So make sure you tighten it down well enough that it doesn't do any wobbling. Next, we want to begin the process of checking the alignment of the blade in the saw. And in order to do that, we need to crank the blade up. So all you're going to do is look at the little markings there and turn it in the direction that brings it up. In this case, it's counterclockwise to bring the blade up. And I do want to point out, I have an entire video just on alignment and how to correct poor alignment. I'm just going to show you how to check alignment in this video. But again, the first thing we need to do is raise that blade up so we can change the angle or the bevel of the blade so you can check both 90 degrees like you see here and 45. While we're here, let's take a look at how to change the bevel. So you see the little indicator there? It's set at 0 degrees right now. We're going to flip the lock, and then we're going to press in and crank it over to 45 degrees and then lock it into place. And we're going to show you how to check that in just a moment. But then what I want you to do is set it back, bring it all the way down to 0 degrees because we're going to check 0 or 90 degrees to the table first. I've had several viewers tell me that the bevel control on their brand new saw was a little bit too tight to operate freely. If you find that to be the case with your new saw, there's a bolt on the back of your saw. If you loosen that counterclockwise by about maybe a quarter of a turn, a half turn at a time till the bevel control loosens up a little bit, that'll take care of the problem. But you don't want it too loose. So let's go ahead and check the 0 degree bevel or 90 degrees to the table alignment. And as you can see here, as I zoom in, there's no daylight coming through. Make sure you set this up between the teeth because the teeth are staggered. If it's off, then again, I have another video on how to align your rigid compact table saw. Go to that video and it'll show you how to change the bevel if necessary. Just like I showed you before, change your bevel control to 45 degrees and go ahead and check it at 45 degrees. So as you can see when I zoom in here, the scale is between the teeth and there is no light coming in between the blade and the scale, so this one's perfectly aligned at 45 degrees. Sometimes the blade will be in alignment at both 0 degree bevel and 45 degree bevel, but the scale might be off a little bit, and all you need to do if that's the case is change the bevel gauge by loosening that little Phillips screw right there and adjusting it just a little bit. Next, you want to check the alignment of the blade to the miter slot. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on that because, again, I have another whole video on that, and that takes too much time to show here. But you want to make sure that the blade is aligned with the miter slot. You want to ensure that the riving knife, that black post that's sticking up beside the blade, is in alignment with the blade. So all you need is a straight edge and place it up like I'm doing right here. And do that in the horizontal plane as well as in the vertical plane. Make sure it's in perfect alignment with the blade. I've read reviews of some table saws where the people have received their saw and the table is not level. It's been warped or distorted or damaged in shipping. So if you have a larger straight edge, you want to check from left to right, just as I'm doing here, on the back, middle, as well as front. So I'm doing it from left to right, and then you also want to do it from front to back. Of all the table saws I reviewed, I've never seen one that's been distorted in any way, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen to you. So make sure you check the tabletop for distortion. There is a very remote possibility that your saw may arrive with the blade slightly loose. So put on a pair of gloves and make sure there's no wobble or play in the blade at all, if for no other reason but for safety. I have reviewed other manufacturers' table saws, and I found the vent control mechanisms to be a little bit stiff coming from the factory. On this one, go ahead and release the latch. You should be able to pull that open with just a couple of fingers and make sure it doesn't wobble. Inspect to make sure there's no dents or damage on the front leading surface of the fence control mechanism, and go around the back side and do the same thing. Then go ahead and open up the latch. You should be able to push this back with a couple of fingers. If not, then perhaps it's been damaged during shipping, or maybe it's just a little bit stiff and it needs to be worked in. The fence control gauge is something else that's set up at the factory, so you want to make sure that's correct. So that's the scale. Go ahead and set it to, say, 10 inches or 12 inches. Lock it into place. Then take a scale and measure the distance from the blade to the rip fence, and see if that matches up with the gauge just there on the left of the scale. And if that's not right, it can be adjusted with, I believe, a little Phillips head screwdriver. I found the locking mechanism on the rip fence on this model was a little bit tight for my purposes. If you find that's the case with yours, there's a simple solution to that. So if you look down at the other end, there's a little nut right there. Just loosen that up. I think it took only about a quarter or a half turn to make this function exactly the way I wanted. So adjust this to a tension level that's just right for you. I found the method or the approach that they recommend in the manual for assembling the frame to be quite difficult. It's like a two-person job to be able to get that done. And I thought many of you are probably going to be doing this on your own. So I came up with a different method for putting this together. So this will not match your manual, but I think you're going to find this a lot easier. Now let's take a look at the parts for the frame that I showed you earlier in the video. These are the four legs, and notice the direction of the feet. Two cross members, and two parts that go at the top of the frame to hold the saw. These are the stops for the X-frame. And four different size and counts of bolts. We'll show you where they go later on. And you're going to need an Allen wrench, as well as either an adjustable wrench or a static wrench or a socket like you see here. And I have no idea why I put that scale in there, but there's a scale. So these are the parts you're going to need to set up your frame. Figuring out where the bolts go can be a little bit confusing. The two larger bolts, as well as the stops, go right there in the middle of the X. And you can see the washer. And then the longer bolts hold the cross members. There are 8 of those. And then some slightly shorter ones go in up at the top here to hold this part of the frame in place. And then this is the size that's going to be used to bolt the saw down into the frame. The first step is to take the shorter of the two cross members and tie 2 legs together. But also I want you to notice how the feet are going, okay? So pay close attention to that. See how that foot is? And how that cross member holds it together? Now we're going to take a look at the other side. Notice the position of the foot. So you're going to do this with the shorter of the 2 cross members first. Now you want to do the same thing with the longer cross member and keeping the feet oriented the same way. So there's the shorter cross member put together, and here's the longer one. And again, notice the angle of the feet. And the same thing on the other side. Okay? Now you want to take the two legs that are held together with the shorter cross member, flip it over and put it underneath the two legs that are held together with the longer cross member. And see how the feet are? Okay? See that orientation? So look at how the feet are. They're right opposite of each other. And then you want to take that little stop that I showed you earlier and place it in there just like this, using that bolt with the two washers as well as the nut. See how that's oriented? Let's take a look at the other side. See how this one's oriented? A lot easier to do than the way they show in the manual. This can be done by one person. Now let's take a look at what you've done so far. Let's go ahead and stand this up. And see how the stops are oriented? On one side and then the other. This is how it should stand. So this is what it looks like so far. Giving you a close-up view so you know how it should look. Now let's take 4 bolts and mount that shorter tray to the legs that are on the inside of the X-frame. So you're going to need those 4 bolts to tie it into place. Right there. And then you're going to do the same thing with a longer tray on the other side. Now take the remaining 4 bolts and bolt the table saw down into the stand. So notice the orientation. The inside set of legs goes to the front. The outside set of legs goes to the back. Now let's look at storing your accessories on your table saw. You've got the 2 wrenches that came with your saw. Let's go ahead and take that little nut off of there and put both of those wrenches right there. And then let's come around to the other side. And your miter gauge sits in there nice and neatly, along with your push stick. So that's where your accessories go. The first step in setting up your safety features is to set up your riving knife, and be sure to be very careful because these teeth are very sharp. So now we want to open up this access and take this little orange lever, lift it up, and then you're going to pull the riving knife up until you feel it fall into some post. And then you're going to lock it into place and make sure it's stable. And then put the access panel back on. Now you're ready to install the anti-kickback paws. All you have to do is press that little lever on the left-hand side of that little knob. And then it's going to go right into that slot right there, so just sit it over top of it, squeeze that little knob into it, and it will lock right into place for you. When you want to take it off, all you have to do is squeeze that knob and it comes right off. And do the same thing again, squeeze it, put it into place, lock it down, and you're good to go. Now that we have the anti-kickback paws and plates, it's time to install the blade guard itself. So you see this little bar right here that I'm pointing to? That's going to go into this slot right there. So all you have to do is lift it up, guide that in, let the blade guard go down over top of the blade, and then lock it into place. That's how easy it is. This is one of the easiest blade guards and riving knife installations I've seen of all of the table saws that I've reviewed. Now you have 3 safety features installed. The first one is the blade guard. The second one is the riving knife. And the third is the anti-kickback paws. Let's take a look at how the riving knife itself works. Now you notice I do have the table saw unplugged because I'm getting my fingers real close to the blade. The riving knife actually acts as a splitter to keep the two pieces apart as they're passing through the blade. So imagine if you didn't have a riving knife here and there's something causes the lumber to squeeze together, it's going to catch one of those teeth, and spinning at 5,000 RPM, it's going to kick it back in your face, and you really don't want that to happen. So make sure you always have the riving knife in place. So what happens is, as the workpiece comes past the blade and for some reason it binds, it's going to bind on the riving knife and not the blade, and it's not going to kick it back in your face. So always make sure you have the riving knife in place. Also, if for some reason your workpiece gets out of square to the blade, it's going to catch on the riving knife as opposed to the blade. Here again, helping to prevent kickback. Now let's take a look at how the anti-kickback paws work. As your workpiece comes through the blade and it comes onto the anti-kickback paws, those little teeth have a tendency to grab into the wood. So if there's some force tries to push it back towards you, and notice I'm pushing really hard here, it's not going to kick back in your face, and that's exactly what you want to have happen. If your workpiece happens to have a finished side, these spines or these teeth may have a tendency to scratch or mar the surface. In that case, what you really want to do is flip your workpiece over so the good side is down against the table, and the kickback paws may mar or scratch the non-surface side. Now let's see how all three safety features work together to protect your fingers. First, you have your blade guard, which keeps your fingers away from the blade. And then you come to your riving knife, which keeps it from binding on the blade. And then it comes to the anti-kickback paws, which will hold your workpiece down. So you have three really good finger savers here. One is the blade guard. Next is the riving knife. And third is the anti-kickback paws. And as I said earlier, of all the saws I reviewed, these safety features are the easiest to install. Again, congratulations on your new rigid compact table saw. You're all set up and ready to go. I hope you found this instructional video useful. If so, please press like and share with your friends. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love to have you as a subscriber. Thanks for watching, and as always, good luck on your projects.